Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of The Inside Story. I'm VOA Midwest correspondent Kane Farabaugh. We're here on the campus of Purdue University in Indiana, and we'll show you why a little further in the program. But first, China has the world's second largest economy, right behind the United States. And both countries are competing for global dominance. That competition is playing out in many ways around the world, and this week's episode of The Inside Story focuses on how that competition is impacting the American heartland. We begin on the farm, where some U.S. lawmakers are introducing legislation to curb sales of U.S. agricultural land to foreign entities, specifically China. Of more than 100 countries with U.S. land investments, China ranks 18th in holdings. While concerns about China securing U.S. farmland resound in Congress, experts say it's more a political issue than a practical one. One of the United States' top producers of corn and soybeans is the state of Illinois, where Wendell Shawman farms land his family has owned for generations near the city of Galesburg. He says he's worried about Chinese investors purchasing farmland like his. From 2019 to 2020, companies with shareholders connected to China increased their overall U.S. land holdings by nearly 30%.
It's uncomfortable having your major competitor, an outfit that's shaking their sabers at you all the time, to be owning land here. That makes you a little nervous.
But Shawman admits he doesn't know any farms nearby connected to China.
I don't know of any in this area.
In Jacksonville, Illinois, Luke Worrell's company manages land transactions throughout the region.
In 15 years, I've never even had communication with an investment group that I've known to be Chinese.
He says most of the transactions he's involved with stay local.
In my 15-year career, I've never sold a farm to any international buyer.
Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst is among lawmakers calling Chinese ownership of American farms a threat.
If you add up all of the acres of Chinese-owned farmland, it is nearly the size of my home state of Iowa.
According to the U.S. Agriculture Department, Chinese-connected investors own less than 162,000 hectares of land in the U.S., only a fraction of which is farmland.
So China owns almost no farmland in the United States.
Bruce Sherrick is a professor of agricultural and consumer economics at the University of Illinois. Of hundreds of millions of hectares of U.S. agricultural lands owned by foreign entities, Sherrick says Chinese ownership barely registers.
Less than 1%.
Recent efforts by Chinese-connected investors to buy land near military installations in Texas and North Dakota have fueled concerns about national security risks. But Sherrick says foreign-owned properties are typically managed or tended to by local entities, often American farmers.
I don't think it's super important to know who owns what, because the land that's producing things doesn't know who owns it. So I think as a matter of agricultural policy, it's probably not a very big deal.
Sherrick adds farmland remains an attractive investment for any potential buyer.
Very high average returns through time and very low systemic risks.
In Streator, Illinois, farmer David Iserman also doesn't know of any land near him owned by foreign investors.
It's kind of a non-issue.
While he'd prefer local ownership over Chinese investment, Iserman doesn't see a need for legislation limiting foreign land ownership. Wendell Shawman disagrees.
In rural America, I think there'll be a lot of support for this. Yeah, I just assume not have China coming in and throwing money around and who knows what, doing whatever else.
Beyond any action Congress might take, a number of state legislatures are also considering restricting foreign land ownership. The 2020 global coronavirus pandemic and its impact on the global supply chain underscored issues on U.S. reliance of foreign-made electronic chips, which are mostly made in Asia. The administration of U.S. President Joe Biden is focused on ramping up domestic U.S. production of microchips. VOA's Anita Powell reports on a $6.6 billion U.S. grant to Taiwan's top chip manufacturer for semiconductor manufacturing in Arizona, which includes a third facility that will bring the tech giant's investment in the state to $65 billion.
A single semiconductor transistor is smaller than a grain of sand. But billions of them, packed neatly together on a chip, can connect the world, control weapons of war, and someday even drive your car. But U.S. production of this American-born technology has fallen off in recent decades.
As a nation, we used to produce 40% microchips for the whole world. Now we'll produce less than 10%.
But on Monday, the Biden administration announced $6.6 billion in funding for the world's top chip maker to build a third facility in the state of Arizona. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company says it will put the U.S. on track to produce 20% of the world's leading-edge semiconductors by the end of the decade. The funding comes from the bipartisan 2022 CHIPS and Science Act, which President Joe Biden highlighted that year in a visit to TSMC's first Arizona facility.
American manufacturing is back, folks. American manufacturing is back.
Engineers say the legislation addresses a key weakness in American chip manufacturing.
We've just gotten in this cycle of the last 15 to 20 years where innovation has slowed down. It's all about financial results, investor payouts and stock buybacks. And we've lost that innovation muscle. And the CHIPS Act, pulling that together with the CHIPS Act, is the perfect opportunity to restore that.
But they say America urgently needs talent. The White House says this new investment could create 25,000 construction and manufacturing jobs. Are there enough workers to feed this need?
Our engineering college is the largest in the country with over 33,000 enrolled students. And still, we're hearing from companies across the semiconductor industry that they're not able to get the talent that they need in time.
TSMC in 2022 broke ground on a facility that makes some of the world's most advanced chips. With each jump, chip production can get more and more complex and expensive. Can the country that made the mighty chip keep up? Biden's betting on it. For Levi Stallings in Flagstaff, Arizona, Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
Now, Arizona isn't the only state benefiting from U.S. government efforts to increase microchip production. We're here on the campus of Purdue University in the state of Indiana, which has a proud history of recreational vehicle and automotive manufacturing. It now aspires to become the next great technology center. Semiconductors, or microchips, are critical to modern electronics. In 1990, the U.S. produced about 40% of the world's semiconductors. As manufacturing migrated to Asia, U.S. production fell to about 12%. Mark Lundstrom has worked with microchips much of his life and believes they were underappreciated until there was a shortage.
During COVID, we got a wake-up call.
The 2020 coronavirus pandemic slowed production in Asia, creating a ripple through the global supply chain and leading to shortages of everything from phones to vehicles. U.S. reliance on foreign chip manufacturers exposed a major weakness.
And we know AI is going to transform society in the next several years. It requires extremely powerful chips and the most powerful leading-edge chips. If we fall behind in AI, the consequences are enormous for the defense of our country, for our economic future.
Lundstrom is the acting dean of engineering at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, historically a leader in semiconductor research, which has new importance in the emerging field of artificial intelligence.
But actually the key metrics of the performance of the chips, actually the size of the transistors, the devices, which is a building block of the computer chips.
Zihong Chen is director of Purdue's Burke Nanotechnology Center, which boasts what it calls the cleanest room in the world, where engineers work around the clock to push microchip technology into the future. And smaller is better.
We are talking about the few atoms in each silicon transistor. And this is the whole facility is about. We are trying to make the next generation transistors better devices than current technologies.
Purdue's efforts, along with those of other university campuses in the state, have boosted Indiana's profile as an attractive location for manufacturers looking to build new microchip facilities.
Purdue University alone, a top 4 ranked engineering school, offers more engineers every year than the next top 3.
Eric Holcomb, Indiana's Republican governor, is working to transform the state beyond its agricultural and automotive manufacturing legacy.
If we want to compete globally, we have to get smarter and healthier and more equipped.
Holcomb's vision is shared by other lawmakers, including U.S. Senator Todd Young of Indiana, who co-sponsored the bipartisan 2023 CHIPS and Science Act, which commits more than $50 billion in federal funding for domestic microchip development. Indiana is now home to one of 31 designated U.S. technology and innovation hubs, helping it qualify for hundreds of millions of dollars in grants designed to attract technology-driven businesses.
The signal that it sends to the rest of the world that we are in it and we are committed.
Indiana's efforts are paying off. South Korean microchip manufacturer SK Hynix announced it was planning to build a $4 billion facility near Purdue that would produce next-generation, high-bandwidth memory chips, critical for artificial intelligence applications. While U.S. chip manufacturer Skywater also plans to invest nearly $2 billion in Indiana, the state recently lost bidding to host chipmaker Intel, which selected Ohio for 2 new factories.
Companies tend to like to go to locations where there already that infrastructure and their supply chain is in place. That's a challenge for us.
What could give Indiana a competitive edge is its natural resources. Plenty of land and water and regular weather patterns, crucial for the processes needed for large-scale microchip manufacturing. One person helping drive Indiana's economic transformation is the state's Republican governor, Eric Holcomb, who we featured in the previous report. We had an opportunity to sit down with Governor Holcomb at the governor's office at the state capitol in Indianapolis to discuss his hopes for Indiana and helping the U.S. maintain a competitive edge. Is it clear from your seat here in Indianapolis that we are directly engaged in a competition with China?
Clearly. And I welcome that competition, quite frankly. I always talk about here in the state of Indiana how if we want to compete globally, we have to get smarter and healthier and more equipped. And we have to continue to invest in our quality of place to make people who want to, where they're going to live often determines where they're going to work in this world we find ourselves in today. And so for that to occur, for us to make those investments, we're right back to how do we encourage economic development? Because that allows us to invest in higher education, in K through 12, in quality of place initiatives, in public health initiatives. And we're doing that at a record pace only because our economy is growing. So that has all to do with our state security. The same can be said for our nation. And if we don't just kind of adhere to or recognize those basic fundamentals, we're at a disadvantage.
Is the initiatives here in the state of Indiana to promote that kind of development also maybe a tacit acknowledgement that we're behind in that competition?
I've said it out loud that we have a lot of catching up to do. And again, we're up to that task. We're proving that every single day. That's why we're increasingly focused on not just our heritage, our agricultural base for sure, but what are we doing in the ag biosciences sector? What are we doing in not just manufacturing in general, but in advanced manufacturing in terms of hypersonics and microelectronics and in the life sciences, plant genetics, animal science, human science, all the above. And we're getting into increasingly talking about isotopes just as much as we're talking about batteries.
I think I'm going to try to quote you accurately here, in which you say that you would like Indiana to become the shiny buckle of the Rust Belt.
Well, you know, a lot of folks have fondly maybe even remembered the Midwest as being the Rust Belt, and much due in part to our automotive prowess and in the Midwest in general, not just Indiana, but certainly for a state like Indiana who has 5 auto OEMs and the supply chain that goes with it. And we produce about plus 80% of all of the RV production in North America in one state. We are not just living up to our reputation as being the #1 manufacturing state per capita in America, but we are increasingly embracing what the future of mobility in this example. But you could say that about life sciences, you could say that about logistics, you could say that about ag, biotech, where we are not just today, but where we're going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now. And for that reason, I think we're shining.
How important is the CHIPS and Sciences Act to this initiative and effort on your part?
Many might just say, what does that mean in terms of money or investment by the federal government? What I believe is even more important is the signal that it sends to the rest of the world that we are in it, and we are committed, and we are focused, and we understand that economic development, economic security, and national security complement one another. They're really the same thing. You can't have one without the other. And so for us, that signal was paramount. Then we had to decide what is our role in it. Obviously, having Indiana Senior Senator Todd Young very much a part of drafting that legislation with Senator Schumer was critically important for us too, and I won't say it gave us an advantage, but it sure did help. To compete, because at the end of the day, we had to compete.
Is this Indiana's moonshot?
I think this is us definitely coming around that fourth turn, going into the straightaway at the Indy 500 at maximum speed, looking for that checkered flag. But as soon as you see that checkered flag, you cross that yard of bricks, and you hoist that Borg Warner, and you drink the milk and cheer, you know there's another race. And so moonshot only in the sense that we got to go to and from the moon on a regular basis. It can't just be a one shot. It's got to be you're prepared for come what may. Global events, being able to control what you can control, your destiny, in this wild world of oftentimes chaos. And so for that reason, I feel good about where we're at and even better about where we're going.
China is now among the nations that have landed a spacecraft and a rover on the red planet of Mars, and it's planning to increase its footprint on the heavens. But instead of competing with China in a new space race, some experts hope it will spark interest in human spaceflight and encourage exploration of the cosmos together.
A rover is about $1 billion.
The steady stream of data Edwin Kite reviews from U.S. and Chinese rovers simultaneously exploring the surface of Mars keeps him busy at his University of Chicago laboratory.
You can quickly go through a loop of making a discovery, forming a hypothesis based on that discovery, and sending a new spacecraft out to test it.
Gathering information in Kite's field of study had traditionally been accomplished using telescopes and analyzing meteors and the few moon rocks U.S. astronauts brought to Earth in the 1960s and 70s. But the new Mars missions are helping Kite and his colleagues obtain a more direct and complete understanding of Mars, thanks to the information the craft and rovers from the different countries have collected throughout the Red Planet.
We're at a really early stage of Mars exploration. We've only scratched the surface of what there is to discover. We don't know which country's investigation is going to stumble over something that unlocks the next stage of exploration.
During a U.S. House of Representatives appropriations hearing, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, a former astronaut and former U.S. Senator from Florida, signaled alarm at the recent success of the Chinese space program, which he says isn't confined to the Red Planet.
They say that they want to put international contributions into an experimental place on the south pole of the moon. Of course, my concern is that they don't get there first and then say, this is our area, you stay out. Because the south pole of the moon is an important part, we think, because we think that there is water there, and if there's water, then there's rocket fuel. And that's one reason we're going to the south pole of the moon.
Which is why Nelson is urging lawmakers to support NASA's Artemis program, which plans to return humans, including the first woman, to the moon, with Mars as an eventual destination. Nelson says China is on a similar path.
China tries, but is not nearly as successful as we are because they're much more secretive in their space program.
China is gaining rapidly on the U.S., and the Europeans are also in this space race.
Rocky Cobb, a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at the University of Chicago, believes a new space race could be positive. Cobb would like to see the U.S. and Chinese space programs collaborate rather than compete.
There's a lot of talent in China that we could make use of, and a lot of resources in China, and they have money to explore space.
But both Kite and Cobb acknowledge there is a limit to how much cooperation can realistically occur between the United States and China.
So the technology involved in peaceful exploration of space can also be transported to military uses.
There are legal barriers to bilateral cooperation between NASA and the Chinese space program, but those don't apply to non-NASA funded work by academic institutions.
Which is why Kite and Cobb and the scientific community they represent worldwide continue to pore over the tantalizing clues relayed from Mars. In an effort to understand the origins of our own planet and species, they say isn't confined to national borders.
I think it would be great in the future if the U.S. could cooperate with China in the same way that now we cooperate with the European observatories and the European Space Agency. It adds a lot to the table. There's a lot of talent in China that we could make use of, and a lot of resources in China, and they have money to explore space. And I think this is something that mankind should do together. And hopefully in the next few years, we'll have a better relationship in science, and we will do it together. There is only one Mars. It doesn't belong to the US, it doesn't belong to China.
Our final report on this episode of The Inside Story will focus now on a hastily arranged but all expenses paid trip to China for students from the Iowa town of Muscatine, invited to the country by Chinese President Xi Jinping as part of his effort to welcome more than 50,000 students to his country. Muscatine, Iowa high school student Cole Lose had never traveled beyond the United States when he was asked in January, "Would you like to go to China?"
I was lucky I had my passport to go.
The invitation wasn't for a date in the distant future. Lose and 24 other students from his high school had less than 10 days to commit to the trip and prepare to fly.
It was very spontaneous.
Spontaneous, but by no means an accident.
Oh, no.
In 1985, Sarah Landy hosted a group from China in Muscatine for several days on an agricultural research tour of the U.S. One of the participants was Xi Jinping, now president of the People's Republic of China. Landy helped organize his stay in Muscatine.
Good things happen when you're a good friend to people, I guess.
In 2012, Xi returned to Muscatine, visiting his old friends from Iowa in Landy's living room. Then, last November, Landy attended a dinner on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco. In his remarks at the event, Xi expressed his desire to welcome thousands of American students to China, prompting Landy to follow up with a letter to her old friend.
And I got a reply to that letter and said, you know, I hope Muscatine can be part of this. So that probably was the incentive for this invite.
Xi's offer of an all-expenses-paid trip to China came with few strings attached. The Muscatine students and staff spent 8 days visiting with local Chinese students, touring the Great Wall of China and other landmarks and cities, and participated in a conference for students learning the Mandarin language. Lose says it was hard to find any sign of U.S. China tensions.
You felt very special over there.
Actually, I'm very, very proud of them. Seems like they grow super fast in few days.
Heidi Kuo, originally from Taiwan, teaches Mandarin at Muscatine High School and accompanied the students to China. Of the many lessons they learned, she hopes one stands out.
The world is super big, not only us here. That is mind-blowing.
Ann Edkin grew up in Muscatine, a city of about 23,000 on the banks of the Mississippi River. She now teaches at Muscatine High School and was one of 4 staff who made the trip to China. The connection between her community and China's leader is a baffling but welcome relationship.
The fact that he came here, that's cool. But to have that ongoing relationship, and it's not just a blip, but it's a continuing relationship that makes it so unique and special.
As more students prepare for more trips to China, Landy's next goal is to encourage her old friend to return to Muscatine, which she thinks is perfect for a future summit with U.S. President Joe Biden.
Muscatine would welcome it.
A potential venue could be the Muscatine home where she stayed in 1985. Now preserved as a museum, mostly visited by Chinese tourists. Thanks for joining us on The Inside Story. You can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. You can also visit our website anytime at voanews.com. Be sure to catch up on previous episodes of The Inside Story on our streaming service, VOA+. I'm Kane Farabaugh, and we'll see you next week on The Inside Story.